I guess we should get started. So first of all, thank you for everyone for attending this session. My name is Howard Wu. I'm the Vice President, Global Head of Networks and General Manager for QCT US. And yes, has been a while since we've done all of this in-person meeting. So very glad all of you can attend today. And for the purpose of this session, usually at the OCP events, we talk about heat, we talk about new technology, we talk about connectivity and everything else. But for today, you don't get the first decade story every year. So we decided to do something a little bit different. Sorry, just give me a second. I'm gonna put my phone on airplane mode. So I want to talk to all of you today really about, sort of the QCT journey over the last decade. How we got involved with OCP and, who we are and really what is our journey over the past decade, our design and build philosophy when it comes to our products, our market segment, what we've learned along this journey in terms of both infrastructure, customer usage, what are some of the, whether it's the economic side or the technology side. I think there's a lot of learning that we all as an industry have grown together through this first decade. And of course, the challenges ahead as an industry, as end users, as we continue to grow and we continue to do the digitalization of every single vertical that the planet has seen. So first of all, in case those of us who don't know who QCT or Quanta is, let me just give you the quick lowdown. QCT is, of course, Quanta Cloud Technology. Our parent company is Quanta Computer, based out of Taiwan. Quanta really started in 1988. And our journey for the last 30, 40 years has been, there's two major waves of, let's say, the compute form factor revolution that we participated in as Quanta. First, of course, in the late 80s, it was going from desktop PCs to laptops, or back then we called mobile PCs. And of course, that was the first wave where Quanta really captured the opportunity. And so today, we're really responsible for roughly about 1/3 of manufacturing of the world's laptops. So if you use a laptop, there's a good chance we made it. And of course, the second wave that we really managed to capture as a company is really during the cloud revolution, right? Since I think it was around, I want to say 2006, when Intel put the virtualization extension into their Nehalem architecture. I mean, of course, virtualization was nothing new, but that was really the first time where we could manage, at least merge the path of virtualization into a hardware core count. And that fundamentally jump-started the cloud computing revolution. And so that was the second phase where Quanta as a company was able to capture a majority of market share by being in a leadership position. And we maintain that high growth and leadership pole position today. Like the slide suggests, today we power the world's largest OCP cloud. And I think we all know who that is. And some of the other accolades we have, we're named Derwent Top 100 Global Innovators 3 years in a row. I think the way to think about who Quanta is and what QCT is, really for those of us who subscribe to the school of thought of the network as the backplane, right? Then we think about how every device on that network is supposedly a component, right? Whether it's a car, a phone, a data center, or any hardware piece. And we're really largely responsible for manufacturing those hardware that's attached to that network today. Quickly talk about sort of the QCT's OCP journey. So as you can see, we were there since day one. And one of the funny stories I'll tell is, in the early days, really Meta, then called Facebook, started approaching us and said, we couldn't find what we need in terms of the hardware and the design from the existing OEM marketplace. And we really want to work with somebody who's actually in the supply chain and the manufacturing process of infrastructure hardware. And so would you be willing to come along with this journey with us? And of course, I mean, looking back now more than a decade ago, we clearly made the decision to go on that journey, right? And so when OCP was presented, we thought, absolutely, right? We are a open, innovative, and disruptive company. That is fundamentally in our DNA. And this is definitely building infrastructure at scale and to deliver it at a global, in terms of, writing locally and deploying globally. That's actually exactly what we do in terms of our, home company DNA. And so we didn't really think much about it, and we took on the challenge. And this slide really just goes to show how every generation of that OCP journey, whether it's from a compute lifecycle, from a GPU demand, from a data collection, analytics, everything from the bottom layer to the top analytics layer, we've been there every step of the way and really leading and helping to build, as well as enjoying being a part of this community. Then I kind of want to quickly talk about our design and build philosophy. I think if one should take a look at the hardware infrastructure industry today, I think everybody has sort of a different corner of the room they own, right? You have different designs and you have different build philosophy. Whether you're going for CapEx, you're going for OpEx, you're going for TCO, you're going for performance, you're going for a lot of the same stuff, a flat line infrastructure baseline. I think, at least in terms of what QCT does, this is fundamentally some of the key things that we embrace and some of our philosophy that really embodies our product lines. First and foremost is innovation. Our founders are technologists themselves and engineers. I think we're a company with very strong engineering culture and background, and we always want to innovate from an engineering perspective, how to build the next generation of a better product. So I think that is fundamentally rooted in the way we think and sometimes in the way we present. It may be a little dry, but all of those are engineering talk, and I'm sure most of you in this room can appreciate that. And so innovation is deeply rooted in our DNA. The second one is an interesting topic because I'm sure most of you understand the last 18 months, the world has turned supply chain upside down, right? Post-World War II, we basically spent the last 70 years building what we call a global supply chain. And in the last 18 months, we decided to flip that completely upside down. And now what used to be 2 weeks to get is now 50 plus weeks in some cases. So I think, however, in terms of who we are and what we do, because of our scale, like I said earlier, Quanta today, we do about $37 billion in terms of our top line. We're a global Fortune 500 in that sense. So in terms of securing parts and managing a globally distributed supply chain, we do have our know-how and our specialty in those areas. And how do you streamline all of that in terms of delivery, in terms of cost, in terms of acquisition, parts maintenance, management, all of that ties in a global scale today. That is actually one of our core competences. The third one, this is an interesting one, because when you take a look at, when you do buy hardware, I would say not every vendor embraces the same design and build philosophy. One of the things, and I hearken back to our engineering DNA, is we do use high quality in terms of choosing the right parts, and that goes down to everything, testing, and testing, because once you deliver infrastructure at scale, there's nothing more painful to having go through ARMA and the recycling process if it fails at any point in delivering that application to any parts of the world. The fourth part is we're software-defined ready. And I want to share with you in terms of, of course, everybody knows us as a hardware company, but I would say we are probably the software-defined hardware company. Now, let me explain that and qualify that a little bit for you. Most hardware companies you talk to, they will have different product lines and product families, and it is I think because of that business model, it is in their interest to sell you hardware silos in the beginning. And so by definition, if you want to do software-defined, you are lifting your management layer and their competences at the software layer. You really don't want to build silos at the hardware layer. And I think that fundamentally is also one of the core thinking in terms of this community. So when you compare those standard sort of hardware vendors to us, what do? We manufacture, we build supply chain. So our interest is completely aligned with software developers, where we also want more of the same. And we want less SKU, and we want them in volume. And we want a flatline architecture in terms of your hardware and your infrastructure. So for purposes of our business model and what software developers want, it actually matches in a way, and that's why I say we're a software-defined, hardware-ready company. And last but not least is, how do you provide a very solid BIOS BMC firmware capability? And that really is the northbound limitation of where we sit today as a company, right? You also see when we compare ourselves to traditional monolithic system companies, where they are building application, operating system, runtimes, hardware layer in the stack, it is in their interest and that business model to control as much of the stack as possible. But I think in today's world, certainly in terms of what OCP is and what we want to do as a community, is break up those silos, flatline all of the engagement. And in that regard, I think we're being a responsible and good behavior community member. So what have we learned this last decade? Well, I think one of the first things we learned, and I think this is a learning in process, because when you think about the hyperscalers of today, I think most of them are still very centralized, whether it's a data center environment, right? And so the last decade has really been about how do we deliver infrastructure to these sites when these sites are still relatively concentrated and centralized. I think one of the interesting topics that we are certainly engaged with, and certainly the OCP community is engaged with, is as we bring 5G connectivity and really think of it as the first generation of the network that runs all the devices in terms of machine-to-machine communications, as we do autonomous driving, as we push compute and processing power to the far edge, you now no longer have a highly centralized data center-like environment. You have a highly distributed global infrastructure. And so how do you even manage that robust and quality sort of at scale when we deliver this? And so I could tell you there's blood, sweat, and tears in terms of delivering hardware infrastructure in that sense. And we know at scale, it is a completely different ballgame than, say, mom and pop shop down the street is ordering 5 additional servers. And that is what we learned. We've also learned that as the software layer, I remember when we started this journey, a lot of the talk was still around virtual machines, because at a VM level, you own your OS, you own your file system, and I think developers should still feel comfortable at that phase. But we know that the layers of abstraction is lifting up, right? As we go from sort of VM-based type workloads to fully containerized workloads, that's exactly what we see, right? Everything now is API-driven. The language is almost English-like. It is very easy to use. And when I talk to my kids, when they are writing code, it is a completely different approach than when I was their age in terms of thinking infrastructure and thinking deployment. Last one, how do we standardize a lot of the form factor? And this comes to, we've had this debate in the community, 19-inch, 21-inch, I don't want to go. Yeah, and what do we do in terms of fitting everything from a far edge site, supposedly rough environment, high temperature, all the way to a nicely cooled AC power type environment inside a data center, and then all the infrastructure in between. As we see sort of one side is the compute and the hyperscalers. On the other side, we clearly see the communications, sort of whether it's telcos or other types of service providers, and this convergence of both ends in deploying those type of codes to the local machines or devices, whether it's autonomous driving, whether it's gaming, whether it's some sort of medical processing unit. Those are the things we definitely see on the horizon and will fundamentally disrupt all the verticals as we know it. Because one of the interesting things we always thought was, if we really think about what the internet is now, what, 40 years old? What the internet has disrupted so far is really retail and advertisement, right? So as I think the interesting part about COVID is the last 18 months, we see other industries rapidly gravitating towards the digitization and the online experience where they wouldn't have earlier. So those are some of the interesting lessons we've learned this past decade. Challenges ahead. I think for those of you who are in, whether it's hardware, engineering design, procurement, I think one of the things we learned from talking to our customers and partners is it really comes down to their way of thinking. I think you will see all kinds of organizations who have what we call organization silos. Different teams, different interests, whether it's self-preservation, whether it's targets in terms of financial or performance. There's a lot of companies out there who are very siloed in the sense that they are not aligned in their ultimate strategic target. And I think that has always been one of the fundamental challenges when we talk to potential customers and partners in helping them going through that transformational journey where they can think about infrastructure in a different way outside of, for example, just how do you even change the mindset from a traditional CapEx-centric view to a TCO-centric view, right? We also said, like I said earlier, we also starting to see now the proliferation of technology into other verticals, for example, the tip in this community. And as we start seeing these proliferations into other verticals, we also talk to ourselves and we think what kind of infrastructure, connectivity, compute, processing power is needed for these things. Sorry, I'm going to grab a little bit of water. Last part is, one of the challenges we clearly see is how do you calculate the true economics of delivering bits? Sorry. Clearly, delivering what we call the bits economy in terms of this environment and figuring that out in terms of CapEx, OpEx, and TCO has always been sort of a challenge for the business. Sorry about the throat. Just recover. Don't worry, it's not COVID. Been tested. Sorry, in terms of conclusion, I would want to say it's been a heck of a first decade. We really look forward to the next one. And I'm sorry about my voice, but I hope this was a good sharing opportunity. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask, or you can come see me after the session, and hopefully I get my voice back.